コロンビア大学の知らないです。レクチャーの、主なテーマですけども、以下です。で、早速、英語で、話させていただきます。So, basically, I'm a scholar of classical Japanese literature, not an environmental scientist. And the question is whether the humanities literature, those who study pre-modern or popular, can this have meaning for our environmental studies? And I hope definitely that the answer is yes. The humanities have recently been considered useless for solving contemporary problems, but I hope to show that it's not the case. Particularly environmental crisis is not just a political, scientific problem, but really it's about the ways in which we think and interact with the environment. So this is just a famous position taken by Lawrence Buell that basically for environmental reforms to happen, the arts, sciences, arts, humanities, particularly performance, are key measures for making those values change so that we can have a better environment. So the environmental humanities goes back quite far. I would say one of the first phases, the most recent phase prior to the present, was what was called eco-criticism. Began in the United States, particularly with English and American literature, was concerned with how literature shapes our views of the environment. In my own book on Culture of the Four Seasons, which was inspired by eco-criticism, was an attempt to show how Japanese literature, especially poetry, shaped views of the human and their relationship to the environment, especially through what I called secondary nature. So this is a representative of eco-criticism in Japan, 2011, and you can see from the questions here, and some of them are related to the notion of secondary nature. These are good questions, and I believe this movement has had an impact. However, we're really into this next phase. And one reason we can see here, for haiku, the seasons are extremely central topic for my book. However, recently for haiku poets, it's become difficult to use kigo of seasonal words. For example, noaki, classical word for typhoon, was a mid-autumn poetic word, but now typhoons also occur in the summer, causing noaki to lose its cultural values. And this is true across a wide spread of seasonal words. The annual temperature has increased drastically. This year was the hottest year in history and is projected to continue to rise in this fashion and eventually making Tokyo unlivable. And also we're in danger of losing the four seasons due to global warming, excess precipitation, and basically in danger of becoming a two-season country without spring and autumn, which culturally were the most important seasons. And global warming will increase the number of disasters, typhoons, monsoons, flash floods, excessive snow, etc., have a deep impact on the temperature of the ocean, which Japan depends on for fishing and aquaculture. So we're really into this next phase, the Anthropocene. And Anthropocene can be considered a type of chronotope, say time-space narrative with a time limit, in which the world as we know it ends relatively soon. And the notion of the Anthropocene has changed environmental criticism. I think the basic question that what's called post-humanities ask is, there are other ways of looking at the world that are not so anthropocentric. And this is given over the last 10 years or so, has resulted in the growth of new fields, some of which new animal studies, or what's called critical animal studies, new plant studies or critical plant studies, interspecies, ethnology, etc. So new animal studies looks at the world from the perspective of animals. New plant studies looks at the perspective from the plants and trees. Multi-ethnography, which is a cross between biology and anthropology, treats human as only one species among many sharing a common ecosystem. New vitalism, recognition of life in the non-sentient. All of these new fields are seeking to decenter the human. And there are many kind of new discourses that have resulted. This one, which are often referred to as beyond nature culture, beyond the binary of nature and culture. So the first top half here shows traditional humanities, the European humanities. You can see animality, humanity, nature, culture here, which results in a division between humanity, animality, humanity, animality, what's referred to as hyperdualism. The bottom half is a kind of post-humanist view with the human as only one species of animal. Bruno Latour and others refer to this as going beyond nature, culture binary. I'll hope to show later that this is not so simple, particularly in the case of Japan and East Asia. And one of the key notions in these new studies, new fields, is personhood. Recognition of animals, plants, and other non-humans as persons, quote unquote, who have agency, rights, emotions, memory, afterlives, and who interact with varying degrees with each other, including humans, with varying degrees of reciprocity. And this recognition of personhood has become a key concept in the environmental movement. Unfortunately, with the new sustainability studies, it's kind of been ignored, but I consider it to be key. So one of the pioneer in the notion of personhood was a law professor, Christopher Stone, who made a powerful argument for legal personhood of trees. Stone argued that like children, women, slaves, and serfs, in a previous year, nature had its own rights and values, and he makes a distinction between utilitarian value and intrinsic value. So the tree has a utilitarian value as lumber, but also has intrinsic value as a living person. And just one example of the impact of the notion of legal personhood in New Zealand in 2017. Parliament put into law gave, in order to incorporate the Maori worldview of the Whanganui River as its ancestor, New Zealand Parliament granted the status of legal personhood to this river. You could see kind of has a Satoyama feel to it. The third largest river in the country. So this idea of personhood has become focus of debate in anthropology and other fields. Marshall Solins, in this graph here, sees animism as one. At the bottom here, it says personhood minus, and then personhood plus on the left-hand side. So he sees animism as one type of personhood, which far left, very high degree of personhood. On the right-hand side, naturalism, kind of a so-called scientific view of the world, has zero or negative. And anthropomorphism kind of sits there in the middle. And I like this particular scheme, although it has many problems, because it includes anthropomorphism, Gijinka. The Gijinka anthropomorphism is a key in environmental literature, culture, etc., religion. Anthropomorphism has been criticized as anthropocentric, as making animals mirror humans or assimilating animals into the human world and ignoring the life of real animals. But anthropomorphism also serves as a key bridge between humans and non-humans, between a naturalistic view and an animistic worldview. Gods, demons, and other spirits are usually anthropomorphized. Anthropomorphism, this is the bottom here, can also be thought of as a means of recovering a lost nature, a lost connection between humans and non-humans, of closing the gap between humans and animals. I'm citing here from Komine Kazaki. So just to give you one example of the importance of anthropomorphism, I'm going to show you a emaki, Yamano Kami Soshi, also referred to as okoze, type of fish. And American ecologist Swingle made a trip to Japan, and he saw the painting, asked Minakata Kumagusu to do an English translation. So here you see the Yamanokami on the left, male, kind of a wolf, and then on the right-hand side, the okoze, female. And this is kind of the wedding, this climactic scene in which other animals are dancing and acting like humans or dressed like humans. The Yamanokami is complex. It's got three basic lineages, one having to do with mountain such as Fujisan as sacred. The second is a kind of Satoyama type of kami in which new life is brought in the spring and in order to produce crops in the autumn, and at Obon the relatives come visit, and the Yamanokami is very important in this particular type. The third type is Okuyama. It's deep in the forest beyond the Satoyama, where hunters, miners, etc., become the Yamanokami becomes object worship among those who make a living deep in the mountains. And there's usually some kind of overlap among these three. And the mountain god is usually female because of probably because of agricultural relationship. But it's often here, as in this case, represented as a male. And I think that's the relationship to the third type. So here, the god of the mountain appears as a male wolf, which now is extinct. They were both feared and revered by mountain workers as a mountain god. And Swingle was obviously drawn to the story because it gives the perspective from a fish's perspective. And also it's very interesting because it combines animal of the sea with an animal of the mountain, the two major ecological axes of Japan. So I'm going to move on to Satoyama, Kami, and environment. As you probably know, around the 12th century, 13th century, we have the kind of agricultural revolution. Forests were destroyed, creating, and then in Japan, those forests were then restored, creating secondary forests, pine, konara, sugi, so forth. And that became a basis for rice agriculture. It's a rough comparison. Okay, so as an ecosystem, rice culture, use of certain animals, key thing here is irrigation technology, the water passing down from the mountains through the forest to the village, so prevents or slows down floods and landslides. And one of the more important things here is the self-sustaining ecosystem with biodiversity. Here, the plants and branches from the forest are being brought and used as fertilizer in the rice field. And the term satomi also was, both of these are recent terms used to look at the water counterpart of the satoyama, and oftentimes the two are actually linked together. In terms of sustainability, the satoyama is important when you think about non-renewable energy, and the government has made a pact for the year 2050. So unless it depends entirely on nuclear power, we're going to have to depend, Japan will have to depend on these other sources as well. One of the important things about the Satoyama is this notion of commons, shared resources between that humans and non-humans basically need to share this a common resource. And if the and this is just a quote from a Satoyama farmer, if the mountain and the human both kill half their desired ends, about right. And last year I was very fortunate to visit Satoyama in Chiba Tateyama with this professor Okabe Akiko. And in our subsequent correspondence, she wrote this email, which I thought really encapsulates the situation, which is Satoyama is not this idyllic, coexistence with nature. And as Professor Okabe points out, it risks aesthetic nationalism. Coexistence with the Satoyama is not something that the Japanese chose, okay? But they had no choice but to do it in order to survive. So it's an implicit criticism of what's happening of kind of what I call Sato eco-nationalism. And you see in the government documents, if you go to the Ministry of Forestry, Environment, it's written in here that typically, I quote, Western cultures exploit and destroyed nature for human profit. By contrast, the Japanese coexist with nature. They live in harmony with nature and are together, are gentler with yasashi, with nature. But this is not quite true. Satoyama is a Pan-Asian phenomenon, and a term was invented or popularized by Shide Tsunahide at the point in which the Satoyama was being destroyed and slipping away as a result of rapid economic expansion. So one of the things we need to do is rethink of environmental Japan, larger East Asian context. We usually think about Kanji Bunka Ken. But what happens when you think about it in terms of the environment? And three of the major characteristics, ring of fire, earthquakes, volcanoes, those are two related to each other, monsoon Asia, and what environmentalists call the Asian green belt. So the ring of fire extends to California and the west coast of South America, but you can see here that Indonesia, the southeast, the southern part of Asia is also extremely important here. The monsoon sphere, it begins in Tibet and carries across the continent, and then this meeting of different fronts, the warm Ogasawara high pressure front causes the highest precipitation in the world. And then the Asian green belt, largely because of the precipitation, is very important to understand. And so the Asian green belt basically extends from northeast coast to the equator, passing China, Korea Peninsula, Japan to Indonesia, has 55% of the world's population. And due to the monsoon climate, heavy rains, heavy snow, the region is covered by heavy forest, but it's been replanted. It's also biodiverse, one of the most biodiverse regions, and traditionally centered on wet rice field culture, agriculture in which humans and forests are closely integrated. We know that the Greenbelt is in crisis now, originally self-sufficient circular economy, but it's become highly dependent on fossil fuels. This is the case in Japan as well. It now relies on imported oil and gas, which doesn't exist in most places in East Asia. In global warming, this is what Yasunari Tetsuo in a very good book that recently came out called Monsoon no Sekai. So he makes a very strong case that global warming will have the biggest impact on Asia, and it'll come at the highest cost compared to regions such as Europe. It's because of the higher temperatures, higher humidity, and because it has been dependent on imports of fossil fuels. So to me, I'm very interested in Subak, which is in Bali, Indonesia, because the landscape is almost identical to the Satoyama in Japan. and you can see the terraced rice fields and the mountains in the back, reliance on controlled use of the water. And I'll get to the temples in just a second. The temples are the focus of comparative water, cooperative water management, system of canals, weirs. So that's a unit. Subak is not just the rice fields and the mountains. It's the temples are a key part of that. Subak also reflects this philosophical concept of Trihitakarana, which brings together the spirit, human, world, and nature. Similar to the Satayama, indigenous knowledge and belief systems are transmitted through poetic, aesthetic, visual, kinetic forms. And the preservation of the subak has now become an environmental issue. So there's this question about East Asian personhood. We've talked about personhood as a key to the environmental movement. But one of the things that I found is that the notion of the human is very different traditionally, or the notion of the individual, for example, doesn't exist. Just the individual doesn't just exist as an autonomous person, but is closely linked to the family or to ancestors. And words for nature or shizen, the modern term shizen, are very different. Tenchiki, anuskara, which means kind of to be natural. So we have to kind of can't be tied to Western terms. We can be inspired by them, but we can't become slaves to them. And notions of the spirit, reikon, etc., kompaku, all of these, plus the words for gods in the Judeo-Christian tradition are very different. And not to mention Buddhism and reincarnation, notions of enlightenment. These make personhood more complex. We can't use the term as it is. So just a few so I'd like to turn to kind of the notion of kuyo and of tama, because without that, it becomes hard to address the issue of personhood and this key environmental issue. So here's a kuyo for insects and animals who passed away. So it's obvious a mortuary ritual for deceased animals and insects. You find this for a large number of animals as well as fish, and even for non-animate objects. Here the harikuyo, sewing needle, which the user feels indebted to, and so this is the mortuary right for needles. So one of the things about the tama is it leaves this body, causing illness or death. It has life after the death of the body. It may come back as an ancestral god or as a vengeful spirit. The tama is very volatile. This is an important notion. And the tama is part of a continuous family. In contrast to graves in America and Europe, where the grave is for an individual, the Japanese grave is for the family, and the tama returns each year. And this communal nature of the tama is evident in this extreme concern for the muen botoke, or the homeless or lost spirit, which has no relatives to look after it. And this also extends to non-human. So this is a small shrine, Hokora, in the forest for a white snake to live there and protected the people from floods. So there's a close relationship between disaster and animals, well, here a snake, and the notion of the tama of those non-humans. And one of the, so a key aspect of the Satoyama, particular ethics of the Satoyama, is that the humans and non-humans are in reciprocal relationship with each other, in a plus relationship, as in the interspecies marriage between animals and humans, or humans and plants, humans and insects, etc. There's a whole body of interspecies marriage narratives, particularly in the late medieval period. They're often related to ongaishi, or returning of favors. On the other hand, if it's a minus relationship, minus reciprocity, then if mountains, trees are just abandoned, then they can come back to, and may often cause natural disasters. So this relationship between the human and non-human is a delicate and volatile one. And it's not humans' need in that system to constantly pay reverence to the non-human. Takes form of matsuri and offerings, etc. Yeah, so the Satoyama is not always a place of harmony. Animal mountain can cause disaster at any point. But the reciprocity provides a key foundation for a relationship between the human and non-human. At the same time, there's no guaranteed outcome, and there will always be a fear of not having done enough. So looking at the broad history of disaster and all the literature on it in the pre-modern period, basically three major traditional interpretations. One is punishment for sin or moral violation in Buddhist karmic context. Second, result of breach in obligation, failure of reciprocity. So disaster and reciprocity are very closely linked. And because of the uncontrollable part of nature, the key term here is aramitama, the wild or dangerous spirit. So significant, the wild aramitama has the potential always to be converted to mikimitama, peaceful protective spirit, and natural disaster was a painful reminder to respect the non-human, whether it was mountain, animal, or a gigantic tree. So disasters can occur after you cut down a gigantic tree. So another thing about environmental humanities, particularly in the age of the Anthropocene, is the need for collaboration with earth scientists. So in last month, I visited Lamont Doherty Earth Institute, This is one of the largest Earth institutes in the world. It's had like 400 researchers. And I met with Brendan Buckley, a professor, and his tree ring lab. And he was actually the one who taught me. He told me that the Miyawaki method was extremely important for his teaching in sustainability. So just a word on forests. They're key to, because they convert the carbon dioxide into oxygen, and they absorb 40% of the carbon in the air. So the forests are a key part of sustainability. And every time you cut down a tree, you increase the carbon. And every time you keep a tree, it's contributing to decrease in carbon. So what happens when we rethink Satoyama from earth science perspective? So the just two major types of trees, the broadleaf evergreen, and you see here the kashi, kuri, keaki, tabunoki. Tabunoki is the most important one here, and I'll come back to those in just a second. Conifer evergreens, and the most wide one is the matsu. There are different types of matsu. Sugi and hinoki. I guess their translation is for hinoki, Japanese cypress. So historically and in terms of altitude and region, they differ. So indigenous forests from the Kanto region to the west up to 800 meters in elevation was originally broadleaf or evergreens. And then we have deciduous broadleaf in cooler mountainous areas, while conifer evergreens grow in kind of subarctic regions and higher elevations. So the further south you go, the more broadleaf evergreens tend to get, but in the lower the elevation. So Miyaki Akira, his discovery of what's called PNV, which is potential natural vegetation. When he says potential, you can't see it. I'm sorry. So Miyawaki studied in Germany with the ecologist Reinhold Tuxen. I'm not sure if I pronounced it properly, who taught him about the science of PNV. So Miyawaki went back to Japan and he said, well, where is PNV in Japan? And he discovered it in a Chinjinomori near his home, in the broadleaf trees, especially Tabunoki Kashishika. And there's a picture of his Chinjinomori next to near his home. So the Miyawaki, so what happened was, as a result of the widespread coppice, that's to say, kind of planted mixed trees in the Satoyama, urban development, commercial forestry, the indigenous trees, which were basically the broadleaf evergreen, were gradually lost and replaced by these conifers. So today, Sugi and Hinoki and Matsu are probably the most popular trees, and they were grown for lumber. So very small percentage of Japanese forests is indigenous. So what Miyawaki did is developed a technique to bring back these indigenous broadleaves. And the key thing about these broadleaves, which grow to great heights, they're highly resistant to disaster, to typhoons, earthquakes, fires, floods, tsunami. And after various disasters, Miyawaki would visit the region, and he would see these broadleaf trees surviving and also preventing fires, etc. And so his method was first identification of indigenous vegetation. So depending on the country and the region, it's going to be different. Then technique of potted plants, and then what he calls a layering of different vegetation, usually with the broadleaf at the top. So the Miyawaki method is now used throughout the world. And you can see this is Yokohama Daigak, I believe it is. So in 10 years, you can go from the left side to the right side. And this excessive planting of sugi and hinoki has caused pollen and widespread allergies. I think in Japan, people have more allergies than in other countries. I'm not sure. I haven't checked this, but it may be largely due to the large numbers of sugi and hinoki. And also the broadleaf trees are a key part of the Asian green belt there, and you can see how the connection. And just in terms of religion, all of the ritual, sakaki, for example, are broadleaf. So that's kind of earth science and culture kind of where there was a deep connection here. So as I close up here, I want to talk about just a word about environmental literature. And the Hojoki has become a world classic in environmental literature. If putting together anthology of environmental literature, Hojoki is at the top. So it's a short work, but it's extremely important and will continue to become even more important. It deals with natural disasters, earthquakes, fires, famine, etc. And it develops this philosophy of kind of just enough, life of restraint. You can be happy without having to be surrounded by material wealth. And it talks about architecture, miniaturization, portability, being ready for the next disaster. Also, he retreats, Kamano Chome retreats, of course, to Satoyama. And, his faith in Pure Land Buddhism is also an extremely important part of it. I bring that up because ecology can't be separated from belief. It's a key part. And the phrase, just enough, this is a very good book by Asby Brown, Just Enough Lessons from Japan for Sustainable Living, Architecture, and Design. So it's from this very famous phrase, Ware taro shiru, which comes from Roshi. And historians have recently have been showing that during a long period of sakoku, Japan developed a circular economy. Large cities such as Edo, Kyoto, Osaka got rice and vegetables from surrounding farm villages and sea products from nearby sea. And they recycled, they use human and horse manure, for fertilizer, they recycled clothing, everyday needs. There was we can call a regional secular type of society, kind of prototype for sustainable society. And here are some of the books that make this argument, and I think it's very valid. So this takes me to the end, toward the end. So some of the keys for a sustainable future, of course, renewable energy and alternatives to fossil fuels, achieving zero carbon, efficient use of resources, water, the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. And Japan has been a leader in the 3 R's. Also, urban design and architecture. So it's not just the Satoyama, it's also, of course, we have to think about the large cities. So urban design and architecture is a key. And I just want to cite from Jeffrey Sachs. Was the director of Lamont Doherty Earth Institute, and is leader in environmental movement at the United Nations. So he says, Japan is a world leader in energy efficiency and in urban design that combines economic efficiency with cultural, aesthetic, and environmental value in urban life. So this is a very hopeful sign. Another key is ecosystems that combine indigenous knowledge with innovation. And I would point to the Miyawaki method as one of those as a possibility. Okay, so this is my last slide. Some educational aspirations, particularly for undergraduates. I think young students that they get some exposure to these key issues, whatever their field of specialization is. So first of all, experiential learning, doing and making. So beyond the classroom. Second, experiencing Satoyama and Satoumi. I think most students don't have this experience, and not to mention American or Canadian students, or those coming from other countries. Somehow to experience what goes on in rice farming, forestry, aquaculture, which is key to Japan's food industry. And I think 1 and 2 go together, experiential learning. Also, I think it's important to learn about circular economy and urban design for the reasons that I just mentioned. And last but not least, think about the relationship of the human to the non-human, not only through the issue of personhood, but through local native notions of such as tama, which extend across from humans to non-humans to mountains, rivers, etc. And last but not least, thinking of Japan, environmental Japan as part of Asia. This might seem just like, common sense, but so regarding Japan as part of Monsoon Asia, the Ring of Fire, and the Asian Green Belt. Thank you very much.